want to start, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Supreme Court decision. And I don't want to run the ground. We're going to go back to our Genesis lesson. I just want to say a few things about it. I didn't even realize last week we came in that it passed. I haven't been watching the news. Matter of fact, the morning they caught the second escape murderer out of prison, the prison escape, Barbara said something about it. I said, oh, they caught him? And I said, what about the other guy? So they killed him 2 days ago. I hadn't even been watching the news. So anyway, sometimes I have to get away from all that and not watch it. But this Supreme Court decision is the most important decision that's been made in our American government since you've been alive. I promise you that. They have basically taken away our freedom of exercise of religion. They took that away. What happens is anytime a new law comes that's by the Supreme Court, it does away with all the ones before, and it overrides. So where we have by the First Amendment, our Constitution, the right to exercise freedom, religion freely, this does away with that. Matter of fact, if you haven't read the, anytime they have a Supreme Court case like that, they have one person that will write a statement about why they ruled the way they did, and then the ones that voted against it will write their dissensions. Well, if you haven't read the dissensions about this, you should read them. They're very, very good and very interesting. John Roberts, the Chief Justice, I want to read you a couple of things he said. I haven't read Clarence Thomas's yet, but I mean, this was a very serious thing that happened. It's changed the way our whole government works. They actually legislated from the judicial bench, which is not supposed to happen. But we have a three-tiered system in our government. We have the legislative, the judicial, and the executive. The legislative are the senators, the representatives. They're the ones that make the laws. They pass those through the president, who's the executive branch. He says yes, or he says no. He vetoes. If he vetoes some, and the legislative still wants to go through, they could override his veto with a 2/3 vote. Well, then, if somebody takes something to the Supreme Court, they actually are and Scalia says, he said, we're the weakest of all the branches, because all we can do is say yes or no, it's legal or it's not legal. We can't say, okay, yes, you can do that, no, you can't do that. We can't pass laws. But that's what the federal judges, a lot of the liberals, some conservatives too, have been doing at least the last 2 presidencies, especially the last one. So it's really, really changing our government. And I'm going to read a couple things here. This is John Roberts from his dissension. His stuff is, this guy must be a brainiac. I mean, because when I read it, I have to really pay attention to what he's writing because he's very intelligent. He says, the truth is that today's decision rests on nothing more than the majority's own conviction that same-sex, and when he says majority, it's the 5 that voted for it, and they had the 4 that didn't. He said it rests on the majority's own conviction that same-sex couples should be allowed to marry because they want to, and that it would disparage their choices and diminish their personhood to deny them this right. One immediate question invited by the majority's position is whether states may retain the definition of marriage as a union of 2 people. He goes on to say, although the majority randomly inserts the adjective to, the number 2, in various places, it offers no reason at all why the 2-person element of the core definition of marriage may be preserved while the man-woman element may not be. Indeed, from the standpoint of history and tradition, a leap from opposite-sex marriage to same-sex marriage is much greater than one from a 2-person union to plural unions. In other words, he's saying it would have been a whole lot easier to say polygamy is okay than it was. I mean, it's such a further leap to say same-sex unions. It wasn't, no nation in this world had made same-sex unions until about 10 years ago. None. And all this has changed in the last 2 years, mostly. So we've really come to a bad place in this country. Let me give you a couple other things he said. One thing he said, but to blind yourself to history, talking about how for millennia, marriage has been between a man and a woman. He said, to blind yourself to history is both prideful and unwise. These guys are really blasting the 5 that voted for it. And they said also they had all these sorry, sad stories about how this person had lost his lover of all these years, and now he can't have him on this. And they said, we don't make laws according to emotions. You can't make the rule of law according to emotions. You'll always be wrong. He goes on to see, indeed, however hardened the proponents of same-sex marriage might be on this day, it is worth acknowledging what they have lost, and lost forever. The opportunity to win the true acceptance that comes from persuading their fellow citizens of the justice of their cause, and they lose this just when the winds of change were freshening at their backs. I thought that was really a good one. There's a couple more I'll read here that are really, really good. Let me go on down to Scalia. Scalia's was, oh boy, it was really good. He says, take, for example, this court, and he's a member of it, remember that. He says, which consists only of 9 men and women, all of them successful lawyers who studied at Harvard or Yale Law School. That's it. That's all 9 of them studied at those 2 schools. 4 of the 9 are natives of New York City. He's talking about how they're not representative of the people in the United States. 4 of them grew up in New York City. 8 of them grew up in East, West Coast states. Only 1 hails from the vast expanse in between. He says, not a single Southwesterner, or even to tell the truth, a genuine Westerner, California being excluded, he says, not a single evangelical Christian. Not one of those people are Christians. He said a group that comprises about 1/4 of Americans. Then he goes on to say, or even a Protestant of any denomination. The strikingly unrepresentative character of the body voting on today's social upheaval would be irrelevant if they were functioning as judges, answering the legal question whether the American people had ever ratified a constitutional provision that was understood to prescribe the traditional definition of marriage. But of course, the justices in today's majority are not voting on that basis that they say they are not, and to allow the policy question of same-sex marriage to be considered and resolved by a select, patrician, highly unrepresentative panel of 9 is to violate a principle even more fundamental than no taxation without representation, or no social transformation without representation. And I haven't read Clarence Thomas's yet, but I'm sure it will be good too. I'll tell you, it's just, we're in a bad situation right here. We've got to vote godly leaders in next time. The next president is probably going to seat at least 3 Supreme Court judges, and it will forever make a difference. We've got to get Christians in there. Another thing I want to read is a post that I read on Facebook. There are a lot of Christians that believe that homosexual marriage is great, that homosexuality is okay. They look and say, well, they just love each other. There's nothing wrong. They love each other. Well, they really do. They love each other. Well, it's like I've always said, if you take the sex out of it, homosexuality, it's not homosexuality. There's nothing wrong. You take David and Jonathan in the Bible. Jonathan was Saul's son, the first king of Israel. And they loved each other. Jonathan and David were the best of friends. I mean, closer than if they would have been natural-born brothers. The homosexuals want to tell you, well, they were homosexual. That's such an abomination to God. They were great friends. They were the best friends. So if you take 2 people, a woman and a woman, a man and a man, you know what? If they live together, they share everything together, that's okay. But when you add the sex element, that's when God says, no, that's not the way to go. And why does God do that? Because God has a better way. God didn't develop us that way. He didn't, it's just, if you look at the human body, we're not made for a man to be with a man and a woman to be with a woman. So anyway, this guy posted this thing on Facebook, and he says, this is for Christians that want to wave the rainbow flag representing homosexuality. Of course, we all know the rainbow came from God saying, telling Noah, I'm not going to destroy the earth again with a flood. That's where it came from, but they've hijacked it.
That's like a covenant that God made with
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely.
And they are just throwing mud at it.
Yeah. It's sad. And you know what? Sinners sin. So you take a homosexual, they sin because they're sinners. We all are born with sin. The problem I have are the ones that call themselves Christians and they don't know what the Word of God says, or they choose not to regard the Word of God. These are some questions this guy said. So if you have somebody come to you that's a Christian and they support this stuff, ask them some of these questions. Number 1 is, how long have you believed that gay marriage is something to be celebrated? How long have you believed that? Second one, what Bible verses led you to change your mind? Or what Bible verses do you use to support your stand on it? That's really good. Number 3, how would you make a positive case from Scripture that sexual activity between 2 persons of the same sex is a blessing to be celebrated? Where do you find that in the Bible? Tell me. Okay. Number 4, what verses would you use to show that marriage between 2 persons of the same sex can adequately depict Christ and the church? Because see, marriage, the whole purpose of marriage is to represent Christ and the church. That's the whole purpose of marriage, to show how we love, and we love our spouse, and we care for them, and we give everything we have. Okay, read a couple more. I thought these were just absolutely excellent. Do you think Jesus would have been okay with homosexual behavior between consenting adults in a committed relationship? I've heard people say, well, Jesus is silent in the New Testament about homosexuality. And he is. But the Old Testament's not. Paul's not. And the thing is, Jesus is what? In the beginning was the Word. And the Word was God. Okay? Jesus is the Word. So anything in the Old Testament, guess who that is? That's Jesus speaking. So if they say, well, Jesus doesn't say anything, he does say things. Matter of fact, the Old Testament talks a lot about it. Paul talked about it. So anyway, a couple more and we'll go on.
That's good about Jesus and God being the same. I mean, you go,
Yep.
whatever God said in the Old Testament, Jesus was there.
Yep.
The three of them have been together.
Well, Jesus is God. Jesus is the Word. So anytime you read the Old Testament, that's Jesus. That's him.
That's the best point ever.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it? Okay, let's see. And let me tell you something too. It's not just homosexuality. It's adultery. It's fornication. I mean, we jump on homosexuality. All sexual sin is bad because the Bible says it sins against your own flesh. You know, people say, why is it so much worse than if I was to go rob something? Because you sin against your own flesh, the Bible says. And believe me, I believe God's Word. You know, and I believe what God's Word says about it. And I'm not going to hate somebody because they're gay. Matter of fact, I have friends now that are gay. I don't hate them, but if I sit there and tell them, hey, what you're doing is okay, tell you what, there's a scripture that says if the watchman or the guard of the city sees the enemy coming and he doesn't sound an alarm and they kill all these people, the blood's on his hands. And so I posted a thing on Facebook the other day and I said, if you tell people it's okay and you pat them on the back or you go to a church that says that, they're going to be held accountable when it all comes to the end. God's going to hold that Christian or that church accountable for not saying the truth. And if you love somebody, you're going to tell them the truth. You're not just going to go along with them and let them walk on into hell. Because the Bible says whoever commits those sins, homosexuality, adultery, robbing, those kind of things, you're not going to go to heaven. It says that in 1 Corinthians chapter 6. Let me read a couple more, then we'll get on with our lesson. I just thought these were really, really good. And it'll make people think, I think. Though most of these things people post, people are not going to read them. But if it gives you an idea of something to say.
Did you post that last one?
I will actually send these out tonight to everybody. I think it would be good for you to have. Okay. What arguments would you use to explain to Christians in Africa, Asia, and South America that their understanding of homosexuality is biblically incorrect, and your new understanding of homosexuality is not culturally conditioned? In other words, how would you tell them that, oh, we have this new idea, homosexuality has been wrong ever since man began, but now we have a new way of thinking? How are you going to explain that? How do you explain that our new thinking is going to change God's Word? Can't be done. Okay? One more, we'll go on. And there's like 30 or 40 of them here. Let me see here. Okay, does equality entail that everyone wanting to be married should be able to have a meaningful relationship defined as marriage? Somebody's already filed before the Supreme Court a brief because they want to be a polygamist.
Yeah.
And like Scalia was saying,
Kids, they like what they want.
a child molester,
What they want.
and they're going to say, hey, I was born that way. That's a natural reaction I have, a natural lust, and I should be able to, because I don't have dignity if I can't do it. That's coming.
We were eating at West Oaks Food Court, and I had my back to him. And was it you that mentioned it to me first? And Larry said, look, and there's two girls over there, and they were hugging and kissing, just like a girlfriend and boyfriend. And I told Larry, since they passed that law, now you're going to see a lot of that in the public areas. And I said, we were waiting on our grandchildren to come before we took her to a movie. I said, oh my gosh, I hope they're not going to be there when they come, because I'm not going to. Well, they're kind of aware of it. They know the word, but still, it wouldn't be a good thing for them to see.
No.
And they were gone, praise the Lord.
Let's go to Genesis chapter 22. We'll get started. Well, my sister-in-law posted something about congratulating him and all that, and I said, and some guy read his Bible and said, well, the Bible says in the Old Testament, if you get a divorce, you got to stone the woman. And I said, the guy needs to read his Bible again. And he said, I've been a minister for 37 years, but religious persecution's coming. Genesis 22. They literally have done away with the First Amendment for freedom of religion. So if you're a caterer and they want you to cater a homosexual wedding or whatever, if you say no, you can literally be arrested now, tried for it, and go to jail. It's coming. And you know what? One Solicitor General of the United States said that Christian universities and things like that, if they disallow homosexuality, or like if they have apartments they rent out to couples, and if they don't let the homosexual couples rent those, they can actually lose their tax exempt status. Well, I've said for years, I think all churches ought to get rid of that tax exempt status anyway. Take it away, because a lot of churches are doing things contrary to God's word because they don't want to have to pay more money, or they don't want to have to pay taxes. Well, get rid of it.
Are ministers being forced to marry homosexuals?
Not yet, but they will, I'm sure. And some states they're saying now they're going to ignore this. When Andrew Jackson was president, they passed some controversial thing in the Supreme Court, and he said about the Chief Justice who made the winning decision, he said, he passed it, let him enforce it. We don't do that kind of stuff, but Andrew Jackson was pretty cool. All right, Genesis chapter 22. Yeah, verse 1. We're going to kind of walk through this, and I'm going to stop and kind of talk about some of the things. But it says, verse 1, it says, sometime later, God tested Abraham's faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. And God says, take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, which I will show you. Well, now, can you imagine? Abraham loved his kids. He loved Ishmael, and he loved Isaac. But Ishmael's been gone here for a few years now. And God comes to him, and after all this time and all that waiting on God and making the mistake with Hagar and Ishmael, God comes and says, I want you to take your son where I tell you, and you're going to sacrifice him, you're going to kill him. What would you have done? I would have probably said first thing, God, are you crazy? But most of us said, no way, I'm not doing that. I'm going to defy God. I'm not going to do it because it's my child. And I waited for this kid for 100 years. I'm not doing that. But what did Abraham do? Man, he went right with it, didn't he? Okay. Well, the land of Moriah was actually a portion of Canaan. It was a part of Canaan. I was talking to somebody today talking about in the Bible, we see all these kings and we see these kingdoms. These are really small areas. You could probably fit 10 of them in Central Florida. And you'd probably have 10 different kings here in Central Florida. All of Israel, current day Israel, will fit in the Texas Panhandle easily. And that's a lot of land, but still it's small for a country. Well, even then it was broken down more into all these small places like Canaan and all this stuff. Well, in this land of Moriah, there are 4 or 5 different mountains. Let's see, there's the Mount of Olives. I wrote one down wrong here. But anyway, Mount of Olives, the Mount Zion, and also Calvary. And I think there's one more. But we're pretty sure that Calvary is the one that God told Abraham to go to sacrifice Isaac.
That's a foreshadowing.
Somebody tell me, what was Calvary?
That was where Christ died.
That's where Christ was crucified. We talk about types and shadows in the Old Testament, how they represent things. We see things physically in the Old Testament, and they represent a spiritual side that we live according to now. Isaac is a type and a shadow of Jesus. Okay, he's an example of Jesus. And it's no wonder God told Abraham to go to Calvary to do this. And 1,200 years later, Jesus is crucified on that same mountain. I think that's pretty incredible. There was a God in the Old Testament, if you read through the Old Testament, that the Israelites, they got away from God. And they began to worship these other. Baal was one. Another one was Molech. Can anybody remember what they did to worship Molech?
Killed babies.
They burned their babies. They burned their children too. And so here God's saying the same thing. And if you read it, you'll see that Molech, it was an abomination to God. When they worshiped him, it just tore God up because they were burning their children to this false God. So here God's saying the same thing. He's sending Abraham to go to burn Isaac. So go down to verse 3. It says, the next morning Abraham got up early. He saddled his donkey and took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place God had told him about. Now, I think he took the wood because there's a chance there might not have been wood there. He didn't know exactly where he was going. Sometimes you get up in the mountains and it's really wet and you can't start a fire. I've been there.
The trees.
No trees, yeah, no wood. So anyway, it goes on and says on verse 4, and on the third day of their journey, the third day, Abraham looked and saw the place in the distance. Well, a man can walk about 15 to 20 miles in a day, on a good day. Now you got to realize there were no roads, paved roads back then. They might have some trails and stuff like that, but where he was going, we get the idea, he pretty much was out in the wilderness. So he's probably having to go around sagebrush. It's a desert, so he's probably walking around sagebrush and all that, so he's not making a real good time. But the third day he begins to see the mountains, okay? It was customary for them to start out traveling early in the morning because it gets so hot. We'd do the same thing today. So he had 3 good days in, he finally begins to see the mountains. God sent him a long way. And he made all the provisions to do, you see, cut the wood, everything, to do exactly what God had told him. Well, I'll tell you right now, that's complete, deliberate, utter obedience to what God said. That's what, Abraham he had some messed up moments. I mean, twice he tried to pawn his wife off as his sister, and he let these other men take her as his wife, or their wife. I mean, I just can't understand that, but he had good moments too. I mean, he was faithful, he was obedient to do what God said. And that's the great thing about him. And like I say, it was not a walk to the desert, to the convenience store. This was a long, hard walk with his servants and with his son. When I was a kid, I grew up in North Amarillo in the Texas Panhandle. I tell people I grew up in Texas, but it really wasn't the South. Everybody thinks I'm a Southerner and all this, but I really grew up in the Midwest. If you look at the Texas Panhandle where I grew up, we were 30 miles south of the Oklahoma Panhandle line. The Oklahoma Panhandle is about 70 miles across, and then you're in Kansas. So I was maybe 100 miles from Kansas, so really I was in the Midwest. And people don't realize where I grew up, it snows like crazy in the winter. It gets cold. And when I was in Salt Lake City, I mean, we might have a real cold snap come through, and I say, well, I bet you it's colder in my hometown of Texas, and they're all like, no way. And 9 times out of 10, you pull up on the internet, and it'd be 15, 20 degrees colder, if not more, in my hometown. I remember plenty of times. One time, the coldest I ever saw in the Texas Panhandle was 17 below. That's the regular temperature. What do you think now with 40 and 50 below chill factor, because we had 50, 60, 70, 80 miles an hour winds? I mean, it's like there's the only thing between there and Canada is a barbed wire fence. Wow. So it got really cold. It was dry, drier than it is here, so that helped a little, but still it was cold. Abraham loaded up the donkey, which back then, they didn't really have saddles for donkeys like they did for camels. So probably threw a blanket over, threw all the stuff on there, and they took off. But they got 3 days a walk, and they would see us. And when my dad would take us to the mountains, he hated the heat in the Texas Panhandle. So almost every summer, we would vacation in northern New Mexico or southern Colorado in the Rockies. And there's this one little town I love called Red River. In New Mexico, in northern New Mexico, the biggest mountain in New Mexico is called Wheeler Peak. Well, you can make a circle. When we would come in from the east going west, we would come into, we try to think of the Eagle's Nest. There's this beautiful lake. You come out and go through this beautiful canyon. You come out and there's a lake. Here's this little town. And this highway circles this big mountain. And it's probably 100 miles all the way around. Anyway, you go from Eagle's Nest to the north part, and Red River is up there. And it's in this little quaint valley, little town. Every afternoon it would rain. It was the neatest thing. You do some things in the morning and stuff, and everybody would go and sell on porches or something. They had like a place where people would square dance as a community center. And so we'd go sit up there and let the rain come, and the mornings were always cold, even in the middle of July and August, freezing cold. But it'd be dry in the morning, then rain in the evenings. Always did. You drive on around that mountain, you come to a little town called Queston on the west side. And then back, and Taos was over there. On the south side, Taos was on the south side. Well, then sometimes we'd go into Colorado, but my dad loved the mountains. Well, when we would drive over there, we would go about 100 miles, about 90 miles to a town called Dalhart, Texas. And we still couldn't see mountains, but we'd go toward Clayton, New Mexico, and about the time we got between those cities, probably 110, 150 miles from my home, Texas, you begin to see the peaks. And we always thought that was so fun, because we'd always try to spy out and see who'd see the first peak. And the real thing, well, this is 3 days into it, Abraham finally begins to see these mountains. So he's traveled a long way. See, we still have a long way to go to get to those big old mountains. First, these mountains aren't nearly as big. But look at verse 5. Abraham talks to his servants. He says, stay here with the donkey. He said, Abraham told the servants, the boy and I will travel a little further. And listen very close to this. He says, we will worship there, and then we will come right back.
What we did.
We. That's right.
Yeah, he knew the boy, he knew.
Yeah, that's a sign of his faith in God, isn't it? He knew that no matter what, he was coming back with his son. I think that's awesome. he knew they would return. And he told us that he spoke out his faith. He didn't keep it inside thinking, well, I hope this works. So he says, don't worry, we're going to worship and we're coming back. Now that's a sign of faith. Faith speaks. Did you know that? Jesus said, Mark 11:24 says, what things soever you desire, when you believe, when you pray, believe that you receive them. And it goes on before that, in verse 23, talking about speaking to the mountain when the mountain's too big. You speak to it, cast it in the sea. And so whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou cast into the sea, it'll happen. So there's something about speaking our faith. Instead of him just bottling it and saying, well, I'm sure when we come back. He told his servants, he said, you wait here, we're going to go worship and we're coming back. That's amazing. That's an example of great faith. That's why Abraham's the father of our faith. I think that's amazing.
Well, the other thing is, God had already shown himself faithful.
Yep.
You know, and I think sometimes when we go through, we face those mountains, we forget what God did behind us, that we counted on him behind us. He knows that God's going to come through. He's already shown himself.
That's right. That's right. Also, God promised to make Abraham the father of many nations. Who else is that going to come through? God had already shown it. It's not going to be through Isaac. It's going to be, or through Ishmael. It's going to be through Isaac. So God knew in order for his children to come, Isaac had to be alive. So he trusted God's word. I just love that. He's such a great example for us to trust. I mean, a lot of things he did, kind of squirrely, but you know, he was obedient and he trusted God. Those are the things we have to take away from that. So verse 6 says, so Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders, and while he carried the fire and the knife, while he himself carried the fire and the knife.
Jesus carried his cross.
Yep, that's my next point.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. That's good. I'm glad you see that. Isaac carried the wood. Jesus carried his own cross. See how he's an example of Jesus? I think that's great. And fire at that time was not an easy thing to come by. You know, you watch some of these reality TV shows where they drop them off in the wilderness and they got to make their own fire. A lot of them can't do it. And so back then, fire was that's a commodity. And so what they'd do, these people would actually travel with the fire, either in a lantern or some kind of lamp. But they didn't let that fire go out. They knew how important that fire was. And so he took the fire with him and a knife. And it says, as the two of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father. Yes, my son, Abraham replied, we have the fire and the wood. The boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? Well, look what Abraham did. First of all, Abraham preceded the age of the law. In the law, you remember Moses, the people came to Moses and they said, man, we need laws to live by. And Abraham said, Moses said, no, you don't need laws. Just trust in the Lord and God will get you through. Don't make all these lists of rules you have to have. And they're like, no, everybody else has them. Every other nation in the world has them. It sounds like our situation kind of today, doesn't it? We got to have this. We got to do this. And he says, no. Well, finally, Moses goes into God in the Holy of Holies. He sits on the ark and he says, God, the people want laws. So God says, okay, I'm going to give them laws, but if they live by one, they got to live by every one of them. So he spells out all these laws that you see in Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy. And if you know anything, if you read those, you cannot live by those laws. You can't do it. But one of the things they had to do, each family had to take an animal to be sacrificed once a year for their sins. Mostly, if you had enough, you could take a lamb. It was slaughtered. They take the blood, they sprinkle it on you, they splash it all over you. That'd be fun, wouldn't it? And then,
if you were married, did the husband do that, or did you have to individually?
no, the husband did it for the
slaughter
family.
Okay.
Yeah. And they actually took it to the high priest. The priests are the ones that did it. They took it to them.
You just had to catch the animal and take it to him.
Right. And it had to be perfectly spotless. If it had any kind of deformation, if there was like a spot of black on it, you couldn't take it. Some of the people that didn't have sheep and stuff, they could take a turtle dove, or it was kind of what you could afford.
And they had the scapegoat too.
Right. And that was a little different thing. That was where they would go in and they would send him off out just with the sins to be forgotten.
Everybody.
And that's why, the Bible says God, he removes our sins as far as the east is from the west, and he never forgets them. What happens when we remember? Huh?
He never remembers.
Never what I say.
Forgets.
Oh, no, he never remembers. Sorry.